Hey designer, why should you use InDesign to build your files for the printer? I'm going to share that with you. My name is Stacy Schilling. I'm a visual design expert. I'm the creator of the Stacy Schilling Education Design Hub with video on demand lessons that you can learn Photoshop, Illustrator, and other design courses right at your fingertips. So I've been using InDesign for a number of years since it was first released back in 1998. It was actually a combination of Pagemaker and Illustrator that was created together, and it was to rival QuarkXPress. At the time in the 80s and 90s, QuarkXPress was used by a number of printers, and because they got a copy of the software for free, Adobe decided that they wanted to go against QuarkXPress and retain business. They had originally had a program called Pagemaker, and Pagemaker was very fun and very simple to use, but it didn't have all the features that InDesign has. So in 1998, Adobe launched InDesign, which was a combination of Pagemaker and Illustrator rolled into one. What it did was it put QuarkXPress pretty much out of business. People started to learn InDesign because it was a much easier program to use to lay out their big document files as opposed to QuarkXPress. It was also part of the Adobe Creative Suite. So in 1998, Adobe created Adobe Creative Suite, which had web and print programs. So it had Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, Acrobat, Dreamweaver, Flash, and Fireworks, which were merged from Macromedia. In InDesign, this is the program that you want to create all your design projects with. All the projects that are going to go to the printer. Now, I want to share a story with you. For several years, I had been working in Los Angeles as an independent contractor as well as a self-employed businesswoman. And I was working for a printer in the San Fernando Valley. And this printer gave me a project. And he said, I need you to take this project and I need you to change the spelling. So any typos, I need you to change the typos. And I need you to make sure this artwork is ready for the press so we can print it. So it was a 32-page catalog that another designer created. I said, fine, no problem. So I opened up the program, and when I looked at the file, I found out that the file was created in Illustrator. So I went to Illustrator and opened up the file. In Illustrator, I found a major problem. The designer that created this catalog created an Illustrator with 32 layers. Now, what you may not know is printers cannot print books and catalogs out of Illustrator. When you as a designer create a project such as like a book or a catalog or a brochure, and it's got more than 2 pages, and it's divisible by 4, because that's how printers need artwork. It needs to be divisible by 4. What happens is when you create everything on a separate layer, printers can't print from every layer. They need to be able to export the document out in a format that they can see to set up for the press, depending on the type the press is being used. Another problem that I ran into with this file, the fonts were outlined. So in Illustrator, you can outline your fonts and turn them into graphics, which is great because that avoids font issues at the printer, especially if they don't have a font or a font gets corrupted. The problem with that is because the designer outlined the fonts and turned them into graphics and there were typos, I had to change the typos. But if the font is already an outline and it's turned into a graphic, guess what? I can't edit the font. I can't change it. And if I don't know what font that the designer actually used, I can't make the changes. Now, I have about 4,000 fonts on my computer, and I know a large part of them, but there's a few fonts that look very similar to one another, and sometimes it's a little hard to tell which one is which. I'll give an example of 2. Arial and Helvetica. If you look at Arial and Helvetica, they are very close and very similar in design and style. It's almost really hard to tell if a font is Arial or Helvetica because they're very closely alike. So when you're looking at somebody else's artwork and you need to make a type change, but you're not sure of the font, you don't want to change it because then you're changing somebody else's artwork. They already have the design approved and paid for by the client, so you don't want to change it. So when that happened, I immediately told my boss, I can't work on this file. And he's like, why not? I said, well, the first problem is it's built in Illustrator. And every page it's on its own layer. And we can't print it that way. And he said, oh, goodness gracious. What's the next problem? All the fonts are outlined. And because they're spelling, I can't change it because they're on their graphic. So I don't know what you want me to do with this file. I can try to work on this file, but it's going to take twice as long because I have to rebuild the entire file in InDesign. And I don't know what font the designer actually used to change all the type to know which font and which letters and which words were correct. So he said, stop, don't do anything, give me the file, and I will call the client. When you as a designer are not using InDesign to build your documents that go to the printer, and I'm talking just about every document, more importantly, your brochures and your catalogs, books, magazines, newspapers, you're creating more problems and you're costing clients more money because that is more work that has to be done. What happens is when you send a document that is done in Photoshop or Illustrator in separate layers or separate artboards and you send it to the printer, guess what? The printer actually has to rebuild that file and all that work that you did. So all that beautiful work that you've created, all that text that you've written, that approval on the design, it has to be redone because it's not able to be set up to send to the printer for them to print it off the press to get multiple copies to the client so that way they can hand that brochure or catalog or magazine out to their clients to increase their business. You need to be able to learn InDesign to create all those files because InDesign is the program to build large file documents. You can have as many pages as you want in InDesign as well as many layers in InDesign and create a file. That file can be massively large. It's going to be easier to not only export out as a package and send that package file as a zipped PDF to the printer or to be able to export it out as a high-res PDF that the printer can use and run on the press. When you create a large document in Illustrator or Photoshop, the file of Illustrator or Photoshop is ginormously big. It takes a really long time to save and it takes a long time to open and it takes a long time for the computer to recognize this. I would know this because when I spent a summer working as a production artist temp with the NBC agency at NBC Universal, I was working on Photoshop and I was working on full-size banners for the show Heroes that were going to go up in the New York and Los Angeles markets. Those banners were ginormously big, but I didn't build them at 300 dpi in those ginormously big sizes. I built them at a quarter of a size because that's what the printer told me to. So when I would make a change or save a file in Photoshop, because those files were so large, because they're large banners, it would take literally 30 to 45 minutes for the file to save because the computer was taking a really long time to save the file for me to be able to do something else. When you create your files for your clients in Photoshop and Illustrator, you make your clients pay twice as much money for the project. Because what happens is, granted the design looks great, and granted they approve it and they pay you, now when you send it to the printer can't open your files and work on them. They can't make changes to layers that have been flattened. If you use a particular font and that font is not embedded and comes along to the printer with that document and it's missing, the font is going to be replaced by whatever the designer has in the design department at the printer, which means it's going to alter your design that the client approved. So when it goes to press and your client gets it back, they're not going to be happy with their artwork and they're going to come after you because the artwork was not right, because you did not set it up right. So it's really important that when you're building these large format files, you build them correctly into InDesign. Because what happens is when the printer looks at the file and they realize it was built in Photoshop and Illustrator on multiple artboards or layers, now they have to rebuild the entire file, which means that costs twice as much money to the client, because not only are they paying for the item to get printed, however many copies it's going on whatever press and whatever type of paper stock it's going on, and whatever type of bound it is, if it's staple bound, glue bound, saddle stitch, spiral bound, whatever bound it is, doesn't matter, that's costing money. Now the printer has to fix your work. That's going to cost the client more money, because the printer needs to be able to fix the project, so when the pressman gets the file, he or she can look at it and get it set up on whatever press it's going on, or create the plate that needs to be made, so when those multiple copies of that file are getting printed, there's no issues. So when the client gets their final book, whatever it is, or catalog or magazine or newspaper, it looks exactly the way they envisioned in their head. So if you want to understand InDesign and how to use the program, you go to my website, stacyschilling.com, and click on the link that says private lessons, and you can purchase 5, 10, or 20-hour packages. Message me and we'll do private lessons in InDesign so I can help you understand how to use the program, as well as how to set up your files correctly for the printer.